The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the quiet highway. It was one of those evenings when everything seemed peaceful, the kind of dusk that made the world feel still for just a moment. Officer Jackson sat in his patrol car, watching the road ahead with sharp eyes, his years of experience keeping him alert even in the calmest moments. He had been on the force long enough to know that danger often lurked in the most unexpected places, and even a routine traffic stop could turn into something much bigger. The radio crackled, but there were no urgent calls at the moment. Just another quiet shift. Jackson took a sip of his now lukewarm coffee and sighed, ready for another uneventful hour of patrolling. But just as he set his cup down, his trained eyes caught movement. A black sedan rolling through a stop sign without even the slightest hesitation. He immediately perked up. A small violation, yes, but still worth checking out. Traffic laws existed for a reason, and ignoring them often hinted at something deeper. Maybe the driver was distracted. Maybe they were in a rush. Or maybe, just maybe, there was something more to the story. Without wasting a second, Jackson flicked on his cruiser's lights and gently pressed the siren, signaling the driver to pull over. The sedan hesitated for a moment. That brief pause, that split second of indecision, sent a small ripple of suspicion through Jackson's mind. But then slowly, the car veered to the right and came to a stop along the shoulder of the road. Jackson took a deep breath, running through the usual mental checklist as he reached for his flashlight. Always approach cautiously. Keep an eye on the driver's hands. Look for any sudden movements. He had done this 1,000 times, but experience had taught him never to let his guard down. Stepping out of his patrol car, he adjusted his belt and approached the driver's side window. The air was cool, a slight breeze rustling the trees lining the road. The driver, a middle-aged man with a thin frame and a nervous smile, was already rolling down the window before Jackson even reached him. "Evening, sir," Jackson greeted, keeping his tone neutral but firm. "License and registration, please." The man nodded quickly, his hands moving toward the glove compartment. But Jackson noticed something. His fingers trembled slightly. Not enough for the average person to catch, but to a trained officer, it was a subtle sign of anxiety. The driver pulled out his documents and handed them over. Jackson took them without breaking eye contact. "Do you know why I stopped you?" The man gave a small chuckle, but it felt forced. I guess I didn't come to a full stop back there." "That's right," Jackson confirmed, studying him carefully. "Is there any reason you were in a hurry?" The man shrugged. "Just trying to get home. Long day at work." Jackson hummed, glancing at the registration. Everything seemed to be in order. Still, something didn't sit right. Maybe it was the way the man's knee bounced slightly, or the way his eyes flickered to the rearview mirror every few seconds. Casually, Jackson shifted his stance, allowing his flashlight to sweep over the interior of the vehicle. The front seats were clean, too clean, almost like they had been recently wiped down. He angled his light toward the back seat, and that was the moment everything changed. A small shape huddled in the corner of the back seat, barely visible beneath a thin, tattered blanket. Jackson frowned, adjusting the beam of his flashlight to get a better look. What he saw made his breath hitch. It was a puppy, a tiny, frail puppy, curled up into itself, its fur matted and dirty. Even from a distance, Jackson could see the sharp outline of its ribs, the way its tiny frame seemed to shiver despite the relatively mild temperature. But what struck him most were the eyes, wide, scared, and utterly hopeless. A sinking feeling settled in Jackson's chest. He had seen neglected animals before, but there was something about this one. Something about the way it barely moved, as if it had already accepted its fate. "Sir," Jackson said, his voice carefully measured, "whose dog is that?" The driver stiffened, just for a fraction of a second. A reaction so brief that an untrained eye might have missed it, but Jackson caught it. "Oh, I just found him," the man said quickly. "Yeah, found him on the side of the road. Thought I'd, take him to a shelter." Jackson's grip on the flashlight tightened. The words were smooth, but the delivery was not. There was hesitation, a flicker of uncertainty in the man's voice. "Where exactly did you find him?" Jackson pressed. The driver scratched the back of his neck, glancing at the rearview mirror again, as if he were hoping the puppy had disappeared. A few miles back. Near Maple Street, I think." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "Near Maple Street?" "Yeah, that's right." Jackson knew that was a lie. He had driven past Maple Street less than an hour ago. It was a commercial area, no open fields, no places where a puppy could just be wandering alone. He took a step back, inhaling slowly. His instincts screamed at him. Something wasn't right. And in his line of work, trusting his instincts often meant the difference between justice served and a case gone cold. "Step out of the vehicle," Jackson said, his voice leaving no room for argument. The driver blinked. "Wait, what? Now." There was a tense moment where Jackson thought the man might argue, might resist. But then, with a defeated sigh, he unbuckled his seatbelt and stepped out onto the pavement. Jackson kept a close eye on him while subtly reaching for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Jackson. I need backup for a potential animal neglect case." The man swallowed hard. "Look, officer, Jackson ignored him, circling around to the passenger side and carefully opening the back door. The smell hit him first, a mix of dirt, fear, and something else, something rotten. His heart clenched as he knelt down, reaching out gently. The puppy flinched, letting out a weak, pitiful whimper. Jackson's throat tightened. No animal should be this scared of a human's touch. Slowly, he wrapped his hands around the tiny body, lifting it with the utmost care. The poor thing was so light, too light, as if it hadn't eaten in days. Jackson cradled it against his chest, feeling the weak rise and fall of its breath. The driver shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I swear, I was gonna—" Jackson shot him a sharp look. "Save it." The truth would come out soon enough. For now, Jackson had only one priority: making sure this little life didn't slip away. Jackson's heart pounded as he cradled the fragile puppy in his arms, feeling the slow, uneven rise and fall of its tiny chest. The weight of the animal was almost non-existent, as if it had been starved for days, maybe even weeks. The small, matted body barely had the strength to lift its head, and its thin frame trembled uncontrollably. The puppy's eyes, though weak, locked onto his, silently pleading for help. He had encountered animal neglect before, but something about this felt different. The sheer helplessness in the pup's expression struck a chord deep within him, making his jaw tighten with barely restrained anger. He shifted his grip slightly, adjusting the small creature to keep it warm against his chest. The driver stood nearby, fidgeting, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. His eyes darted between the officer and the dog, and every muscle in his body screamed discomfort. He was nervous, and Jackson knew why. He had lied, and now that lie was unraveling before his eyes. "Where did you say you found him again?" Jackson asked, his voice low and firm. The man cleared his throat, his fingers gripping the edges of his jacket. Like I said, I found him on the side of the road, just wandering around. Jackson inhaled deeply, keeping his expression unreadable. That's strange, because he doesn't look like a stray. He looks like he's been confined for a long time, without food or water. You sure you didn't forget to mention something? The man swallowed hard, and Jackson could see the conflict in his face, the internal battle between sticking to his lie and admitting the truth. But people like him rarely confessed easily. Jackson turned his attention back to the puppy, running a gentle hand over its frail body. The moment he touched its tiny ribs, the pup let out a barely audible whimper, shrinking into itself. The sound hit him harder than expected, cutting through the layers of detachment he usually maintained on the job. He had dealt with criminals, seen people at their worst, but there was something uniquely cruel about harming something so defenseless. He took a steadying breath before speaking again. This dog didn't end up like this overnight. It takes time for an animal to reach this level of starvation. And looking at him, I'd say it's been a while since he's had a proper meal. The driver opened his mouth, but no words came out. His gaze flickered toward the patrol car, as if calculating whether he could make a run for it. Jackson's stance shifted slightly, a subtle warning that any such attempt would be futile. "Tell me the truth," Jackson said, his tone colder now. "Where did he come from?" A heavy silence stretched between them. The only sound was the faint rustling of leaves in the evening breeze and the occasional hum of passing cars in the distance. Jackson could see the man's mind racing, searching for an escape, a way out of the situation he had found himself in. But there wasn't one. Finally, with a shaky sigh, the driver muttered, "It's not mine." Jackson arched an eyebrow. "Then whose is it?" The man hesitated. "I was just—" He stopped himself, exhaling sharply. "I was just supposed to drop him off somewhere." Jackson's grip on the puppy tightened slightly. "Drop him off where?" The man looked away, rubbing a hand over his face. "I don't know, okay? Someone gave him to me, told me to get rid of him." Jackson felt a wave of anger rise in his chest. "Get rid of him?" His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it now. So what was the plan? Dump him in the woods? Leave him somewhere to die? The driver flinched at the words, but didn't answer. That was all the confirmation Jackson needed. His radio crackled to life, and he reached for it with his free hand. "Dispatch, this is Officer Jackson. I need animal control and backup at my location. Possible case of animal cruelty, and I have a suspect in custody." The driver's head snapped up. "Wait, no, come on, I didn't—" Jackson shot him a warning look. "You can explain yourself to the proper authorities." He gently placed the puppy inside his patrol car, wrapping it in his jacket before shutting the door. The little thing barely moved, exhausted beyond measure. But at least now, it was safe. Minutes later, another patrol car pulled up, followed closely by an animal rescue unit. A female officer stepped out, approaching Jackson with a questioning look. "What have we got?" Jackson nodded toward the sedan. Driver was in possession of a severely neglected puppy, claims he was getting rid of it for someone else. "I don't buy it." The officer frowned, her eyes shifting to the trembling man. "Think he's involved in something bigger?" Jackson exhaled. "Maybe. Either way, we need to find out where this pup came from and if there are more." The animal rescue team wasted no time. A young woman from the team knelt beside the open car door, carefully reaching for the puppy. As soon as her hands made contact, her face darkened. "He's in bad shape, malnourished, dehydrated, probably hasn't had proper care in weeks." Jackson watched as she lifted the tiny body into a soft blanket, her expression tight with concern. Will he make it? The woman hesitated. We'll do everything we can, but he's weak. Jackson's jaw clenched. He turned back to the suspect, who stood in tense silence, his hands shoved into his pockets. You'd better start talking. Who gave you the dog? The man exhaled loudly, shaking his head. I don't know their name. Just some guy who said he needed it gone. That's all I know. Jackson studied him, trying to determine whether he was lying. But something about his body language told him that while he might be withholding details, he wasn't entirely making this up. The officer beside him pulled out a notepad. Describe the guy. The man shifted uncomfortably. I didn't get a good look. Jackson gave him a hard stare. Then you'd better start remembering, because right now, you're the only one we've got to go on. The man swallowed, nodding. Okay. He was, mid-40s maybe, kind of rough-looking, drove a white truck. Jackson filed the details away. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He turned back to the rescue worker, who was now carrying the puppy toward their vehicle. Where are you taking him? Closest animal hospital, she replied. He needs fluids, food, and a full checkup. Jackson nodded. Keep me updated. As the rescue team drove off, Jackson turned back to his colleagues. Get him booked. If he's lying, we'll find out soon enough. The man was placed in cuffs, his protests ignored as he was guided toward the patrol car. Jackson watched as the door slammed shut behind him, then exhaled slowly. His shift was almost over, but he wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. He had to make sure that puppy got the care it needed. Because tonight, Jackson wasn't just a cop. He was its only chance at survival. Jackson sat in his patrol car, fingers tapping against the steering wheel as he stared down the empty road ahead. The flashing lights of the animal rescue van had disappeared into the distance, taking the fragile puppy to safety, but his mind was still racing. Cases like this always left a heavy weight on his shoulders. He had seen a lot in his years on the force: violence, theft, accidents, but there was something uniquely unsettling about animal neglect. It took a different kind of cruelty to hurt something so innocent, so defenseless. He let out a slow breath, rubbing a hand over his face before glancing in the rearview mirror. The man sat in the back of his patrol car, wrists cuffed, eyes darting around like a cornered animal. Jackson had booked countless criminals, but there was something different about this one. He wasn't just a careless pet owner. He wasn't someone who had neglected an animal due to ignorance or circumstance. No, there was something deeper here, something more sinister. The way the man had hesitated when asked about the puppy, the way he kept looking at the rearview mirror during the traffic stop, the way he stammered when asked where the dog came from. Jackson had dealt with liars before, and this guy was definitely hiding something. His radio crackled, snapping him out of his thoughts. Jackson, this is dispatch. Need an update on your status. He picked up the receiver. Suspect in custody. Animal has been transported to a veterinary hospital for treatment. Possible leads on additional parties involved. There was a brief pause before the dispatcher's voice came back. Copy that. Bring the suspect in. We'll process him and run his background. Jackson nodded to himself, shifting the car into gear. The drive back to the station was quiet, the only sound the occasional rustle of fabric as the man in the back seat adjusted uncomfortably. After a few minutes, Jackson finally spoke. You still sticking to your story? The man exhaled sharply, his shoulders slumping. I already told you everything I know. No, Jackson said evenly. You told me what you thought I'd believe. There's a difference. Silence stretched between them before the man muttered, Look, I don't want trouble. Jackson huffed a quiet laugh, though there was no humor in it. Then you shouldn't have gotten involved with people who dump puppies on the side of the road. The man shifted, but didn't respond. Jackson decided to push a little harder. Here's the thing, he continued. That puppy is barely clinging to life. And if it dies, this goes from animal neglect to something much worse. You understand that, right? The man's jaw tightened. Jackson studied him through the mirror. You don't strike me as the mastermind type, so that leaves me with two possibilities. One, you're lying to protect yourself, or two, you're lying to protect someone else. The man let out a long breath, staring out the window as the station came into view. Jackson could see the conflict written all over his face, the hesitation, the flicker of guilt buried beneath layers of poor decisions. Finally, as the patrol car rolled to a stop outside the station, the man spoke, voice barely above a whisper. There's more. Jackson didn't react, didn't push, just let the silence linger, waiting. The man swallowed hard before continuing. That puppy, he wasn't the only one. Jackson felt his pulse quicken. There's more, he asked, keeping his tone steady. The man nodded, licking his lips nervously. Yeah, a lot more. Jackson clenched his jaw, already feeling the adrenaline surge through his veins. He needed to handle this carefully. If there were more animals suffering, he couldn't afford to waste time. How many? The man hesitated before mumbling. I don't know. I didn't see them all. But at least a dozen. Jackson's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Where? The man took a shaky breath. There's this old property, abandoned place outside of town. That's where they keep them. Jackson's mind raced. They? The man swallowed again. It's a group. Some kind of operation. I don't know the details, I swear. I was just supposed to get rid of that one. That's all they told me. Jackson processed the information quickly. This wasn't just a case of one neglected puppy. This was something bigger, something organized. And that meant more animals were suffering right now, waiting for someone to save them. He turned off the engine and stepped out of the car. The station's entrance loomed ahead. But he wasn't thinking about paperwork or processing anymore. He needed to act fast. He needed a plan. As he yanked open the back door and gestured for the man to step out, he spoke in a low, controlled voice. You're going to tell me everything you know, right now. Jackson's mind was racing as he led the suspect into the station. If what this man was saying was true, there were more innocent animals suffering somewhere, waiting for help. The weight of that knowledge pressed heavily on his shoulders. He had dealt with cases of neglect before, but an organized operation, that was something else entirely. The station was buzzing with activity, officers typing up reports, phones ringing, voices overlapping. But none of it mattered to Jackson right now. He guided the suspect into the interrogation room, shutting the door behind them. The room was cold, dimly lit, with nothing but a metal table and 2 chairs. He motioned for the man to sit. You said there's more, Jackson started, his voice steady but firm. Start from the beginning. The man hesitated, rubbing his wrists where the cuffs had been. His eyes darted around the room as if looking for an escape. Jackson leaned forward slightly. Look, I don't have time for games. Every second you waste, those animals suffer. So, tell me everything. The man sighed heavily, running a hand through his unkempt hair. It's a group, he admitted finally. They take in dogs, sometimes stolen, sometimes strays. Some they sell, others. He trailed off, his jaw tightening. Jackson's fists clenched. Others what? The man looked down at the table. They don't all make it. A chill ran down Jackson's spine. He had suspected it was bad, but hearing it confirmed made his stomach twist with anger. "Where is this place?" he pressed. The man hesitated again, then exhaled sharply. "It's an old farm, out past Route 9, near the abandoned grain mill. No one goes there anymore." Jackson didn't waste another second. He pushed back from the table, stepping out of the room and calling for his captain. Within minutes, the department was mobilizing. Officers prepped their gear, and a plan was quickly forming. This wasn't just a case of neglect anymore, it was an operation, and they needed to shut it down before more animals suffered. As the team loaded into their vehicles, Jackson could feel the adrenaline coursing through him. The drive to the location felt like it took an eternity, though in reality, it was only 20 minutes. When they finally arrived, the sight of the rundown property made his stomach turn. The barn looked like it was barely standing, its wooden walls worn and rotting. Old fencing lined the perimeter, but it was falling apart in places. The air smelled foul, like damp wood and something worse. Jackson and his team moved cautiously, guns drawn, flashlights cutting through the growing darkness. There was no sign of immediate movement, but that didn't mean the place was empty. Then, a sound, a faint whimper. Jackson's heart clenched. He signaled to the others, and they fanned out, moving toward the source of the noise. As they got closer, the sound became clearer. Multiple whimpers, soft cries, barely audible over the rustling of the wind. Then they saw it. A row of metal cages, hidden behind the barn, stacked on top of each other. Some had blankets thrown over them, but most were exposed, revealing terrified eyes peering out from behind the rusted bars. Dogs of all sizes, breeds, and conditions, crammed together in small spaces, their bodies thin, their fur matted with dirt. Some didn't even have the strength to lift their heads. Jackson's jaw tightened as he stepped closer, his flashlight revealing the full horror of the situation. Some of these animals had been here for a long time, too long. "We've got them," one of the officers called out, already pulling bolt cutters from his belt. Jackson turned his attention to the main barn. If these people were still here, they weren't getting away. He moved quickly, pushing the door open with force. The stench that hit him made his stomach churn. Rotting food, damp hay, and something far worse. His flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing a crude setup. Tables covered in chains, old crates filled with supplies. And then, movement. A shadow darted across the far end of the barn. "Police!" Jackson shouted, stepping forward. "Come out with your hands up." For a moment, there was silence. Then, the sound of footsteps. Someone running. Jackson didn't hesitate. He took off after them, boots pounding against the barn floor. The suspect was fast, but Jackson was faster. He lunged, grabbing the person's arm and pulling them down. A struggle ensued, but within seconds, he had them pinned. "Not so fast," Jackson muttered, yanking the suspect's hands behind their back and cuffing them. Backup arrived moments later, securing the area. Within the next hour, multiple arrests were made. The rest of the team worked tirelessly to free the dogs, loading them into rescue vehicles, ensuring they were finally safe. Jackson stood back, watching as one of the puppies, small, trembling, but alive, was lifted gently into a rescuer's arms. He recognized it, the same pup from earlier, the one he had found in the car. Its eyes, once dull and lifeless, now held a flicker of something else. Hope. As the last of the animals were taken away to safety, Jackson took a deep breath. This wasn't just a case, it was a rescue, and tonight, they had made a difference. If this story touched your heart, Make sure to like the video and share it with others. It might just inspire someone to save a life today.